They never ask you directly. That's the first rule. When an intelligence agency wants to know if you'll betray them, they don't sit you down in a cold room under a flickering light. They watch, they wait, and they test you in ways you'll never see coming until it's already too late. There's a moment in every intelligence officer's career, whether they serve ISI, RAW, or any agency that operates in the shadows, when they realize something chilling. The organization doesn't just own their work, it owns their doubts, their fears, their entire sense of reality. And in that moment, usually late at night when the weight of secrecy becomes unbearable, they ask themselves a question they can never say out loud. Am I being tested right now? The answer, almost always, is yes. Loyalty isn't something intelligence agencies measure once and forget. It is not a box you check during recruitment or a psychological evaluation you pass in your first year. Loyalty is a living, breathing obsession that consumes these organizations from the inside out. In the world of espionage, skill can be taught, tactics can be trained, technology can be upgraded. But loyalty is the one variable that can destroy an entire operation, collapse a network spanning decades, and turn a decorated officer into the most dangerous threat an agency has ever faced. That's why ISI and RAW, two of the most secretive and ruthless intelligence machines in South Asia, have built entire invisible architectures designed for one purpose: to test whether you can be trusted when everything you love is on the line. Most people imagine loyalty tests as dramatic confrontations, a superior officer slamming a file on the desk, polygraph machine, a confession extracted under pressure. But that's Hollywood. That's the sanitized version designed to comfort civilians into believing intelligence work has rules, procedures, accountability. The real tests are far more insidious. They happen in the silence between assignments, in the way a handler suddenly goes cold for weeks without explanation, and the anomaly slipped into your briefing that makes no tactical sense, unless someone is watching to see if you'll report it. These aren't tests designed to catch traitors. They're designed to see how you think when you believe no one is watching. Consider this. You're an intelligence officer embedded deep in a foreign city, running sources, collecting fragments of information that could shift the balance of power between nations. One day, your handler gives you an instruction that feels wrong, not illegal, not obviously treasonous, just wrong. Maybe it's a target that doesn't fit the mission. Maybe it's a contact you're told to burn without explanation. Maybe it's a piece of intelligence you're ordered to bury instead of report. And in that moment, you have a choice. Do you follow orders because loyalty means obedience? Or do you question the order because loyalty means protecting the mission above all else? Here's the trap. Both answers can destroy you. If you obey without question, you've revealed you're a tool, not a thinker. And tools get discarded when they're no longer useful. If you question too much, you've revealed you place your judgment above the chain of command. And that kind of independence is how moles are born. Either way, someone is taking notes. Someone is updating your file, and you'll never know which choice was the right one until it's far too late. This is why intelligence officers live in a state of perpetual psychological siege. The pressure doesn't come from enemy operatives or hostile interrogations. It comes from their own side, from never knowing if the person sitting across from them at the safe house is a colleague or an auditor, from wondering if that unexpected promotion was a reward or a way to isolate them. For closer observation, from the creeping paranoia that every conversation, every relationship, every moment of doubt is being cataloged somewhere in a file that will define whether they retire with honor or disappear into a scandal that never makes the news. The most effective loyalty tests aren't the ones you fail. They're the ones you never realize you took. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. These tests don't end. You don't pass them once and earn permanent trust. Intelligence agencies operate on the assumption that anyone can be turned, that loyalty has a price, and that price changes depending on circumstance. An officer who would never betray their country for money might do it to save their child. Someone who resists ideological manipulation might crumble under blackmail. A patriot today could become a traitor tomorrow if the right pressure finds the right crack. So, the tests evolve, they adapt, they grow more sophisticated as you rise through the ranks, because the higher you climb, the more damage you can do if you turn. The agency that gave you purpose, identity, and power is the same agency that will never fully believe you're loyal. Not today, not ever. But there's something even darker underneath all of this. Something intelligence agencies will never admit publicly. Something that gets whispered about in the deepest corners of the community, where only the most senior officers dare to speak. Sometimes the loyalty test isn't designed to verify your allegiance. Sometimes it's designed to break it, to push you so far, isolate you so completely, manipulate you so thoroughly, that you finally reveal who you really are when everything you believed in has been stripped away. And when that happens, when an officer finally breaks under the weight of invisible tests they didn't know they were taking, the agency learns something invaluable. They learn exactly how to control you, or exactly why you need to be eliminated. The question you should be asking now isn't whether these tests exist. It's whether you'd even recognize one if you were in the middle of it right now. And if the answer terrifies you, then you're finally beginning to understand what it means to live in a world where trust is the deadliest weapon of all. The truth is, the first test you pass means nothing. In fact, passing might be the most dangerous thing you ever do. Intelligence agencies understand something most people never grasp. Trust isn't built through reliability. It's built through controlled exposure to risk. When an officer follows orders perfectly, completes missions without error, maintains operational security without a single breach, they haven't proven loyalty. They've simply proven competence. And competence alone tells an agency nothing about what happens when the structure breaks down, when the orders stop making sense, when the officer is alone with a choice that no doctrine can guide them through. That's when the real test begins, not in the moments of clarity, but in the spaces between certainty and doubt, where most people don't even realize they're making decisions that will define the rest of their lives. This is why intelligence services engineer long silences, why they withhold information from their own officers, why a handler will suddenly become unreachable for days or weeks, leaving an operative stranded in a foreign city with no guidance, no confirmation, no certainty that anyone is still listening. To an outsider, this looks like organizational dysfunction. To the officer living through it, it feels like abandonment. But to the agency watching from above, it's a laboratory. They're studying what you do when you think the mission has collapsed. Do you panic? Do you improvise? Do you make contact with unauthorized channels? Do you protect the operation or protect yourself? Every choice you make in that silence is being recorded by someone you've never met, analyzed for patterns you don't know exist, and filed away in assessments that will surface years later, when you've forgotten the silence ever happened. But here's the deeper mechanism at work. Agencies don't just test you in isolation. They test you in proximity. They give you relationships. A mentor who seems to believe in you. A colleague who shares your frustrations. A junior officer who looks up to you and asks questions that feel innocent, but map the boundaries of your discretion. These aren't accidents. These are controlled environments, designed to make you feel safe enough to reveal what you'd never reveal under interrogation. Comfort is the interrogation. Friendship is the surveillance. And the moment you begin to trust someone inside the organization, the moment you let your guard down and speak with the assumption that you're among allies, you've just handed the agency the most valuable intelligence they could ever gather. Not about enemy operations, about you. Some officers catch on eventually. They realize the patterns. They see how relationships inside intelligence work don't quite feel organic. How conversations seem to guide themselves towards specific topics. How moments of vulnerability are often followed by unexpected scrutiny. So they adapt. They become careful. They lock down. They give nothing away. And this is when the agencies learn the most important thing of all. They learn whether your silence comes from discipline or from guilt. Because there is a difference between someone who stays quiet because they understand operational security and someone who stays quiet because they're hiding something. One kind of silence protects the mission. The other kind protects the individual, and agencies have spent decades learning how to tell them apart. The mechanism is subtle. They watch how you respond to partial information. They give you fragments of intelligence and see if you try to fill in the gaps, because people with secrets often reveal them while trying to demonstrate knowledge they shouldn't have. They observe your reactions when colleagues are suddenly removed from their posts without explanation, studying whether you seem worried, curious, or relieved. They note how you behave when you think you've been passed over for promotion, because ambition and resentment are the emotional doorways through which foreign intelligence services enter, and they track how you respond when given more access than you expected, because a loyal officer treats new clearance with caution, while a compromised officer treats it as an opportunity. The paranoia this creates isn't a side effect, it's the design. An officer who believes they're always being watched is an officer who regulates their own behavior with more precision than any surveillance apparatus could achieve. The uncertainty becomes its own control system. You stop trusting your instincts because you don't know if your instincts are genuine or have been shaped by tests you didn't recognize. You second-guess your own memories, wondering if the conversation last month was real or staged. You begin to see patterns everywhere because the human mind, under sustained pressure, will create patterns even where none exist. And this is exactly what the agency wants. Not because they enjoy cruelty, but because an officer who questions everything is an officer who will never act against the organization with full confidence. Doubt is the leash. Paranoia is the lock. But there's a level beyond this that few ever see. Intelligence agencies don't just test whether you'll betray them. They test whether you'll betray yourself. They put you in positions where loyalty to the mission conflicts with loyalty to the law, where loyalty to your country conflicts with loyalty to your family, where loyalty to your principles conflicts with loyalty to the people depending on you. These aren't hypothetical dilemmas. They're engineered fractures designed to see which part of you breaks first. And the cruel mathematics of it is this: no matter what you choose, you'll walk away believing you failed someone. The agency, your country, your family, yourself. The test isn't about finding the right answer. It's about discovering which betrayal you can live with, because that's the betrayal they'll use to keep you in place when everything else starts to fall apart. Officers who survive these systems long enough develop a strange kind of double consciousness. They exist simultaneously as the person taking the test and the person analyzing whether the test is real. They make decisions while watching themselves make decisions, always aware that what feels like autonomy might be choreographed, that what feels like trust might be surveillance, that what feels like career advancement might be isolation disguised as promotion. This split awareness is exhausting. It erodes the boundary between professional paranoia and personal dissolution. And some officers, the ones who make it to the highest levels, eventually arrive at a realization that changes everything. The most dangerous loyalty test isn't the one designed to see if you'll betray the agency. It's the one designed to see if you're still capable of loyalty to anything at all. When an intelligence agency begins to trust you, that's when you should be most afraid. There's a pattern that repeats itself across decades, across agencies, across continents, and it always unfolds the same way. An officer performs well. They handle difficult assignments with precision. They maintain discipline under pressure. And then, gradually, something shifts. They're given access to more sensitive material. They're invited into rooms where decisions are made, not just executed. They're told things that feel like secrets, like the organization is finally letting them inside. And in those moments, when an officer feels they've earned trust, when they believe they've finally crossed from probation into acceptance, they've actually entered the most dangerous phase of evaluation they'll ever face. Because access isn't trust, it's bait. Intelligence agencies understand that the deepest truths about a person only emerge when they believe they're no longer being tested. When an officer thinks they've proven themselves, they relax. They stop performing. They start behaving according to instinct rather than training. And that's when the agency sees who they really are. Not the disciplined professional they present under scrutiny, but the private self they guard when they think no one important is watching. This is why ISI and RAW grant clearance before certainty. Why they promote officers into positions of influence while still harboring doubts about their ultimate allegiance. The higher the stakes, the more revealing the behavior. Give someone access to classified material and watch what they do with it. When they think their career is secure, give them authority over junior officers and observe how they wield power. When they believe oversight has faded, give them knowledge that could reshape operations and see if they protect it, exploit it, or quietly begin to weaponize it for purposes the agency never intended. The tests during this phase don't announce themselves. There are no obvious tripwires, no dramatic moments of confrontation. Instead, there are discontinuities, small fractures in the logic of how the organization treats you. You're praised for work on an operation, then excluded from the follow-up briefing without explanation. You're given a commendation, then reassigned to a role that feels like a demotion disguised as lateral movement. You're told your input is valued, then your recommendations vanish into silence, never acknowledged, never implemented, never discussed again. Each of these moments creates a choice point. Do you ask why? Do you push for clarity? Do you accept the ambiguity and continue working? Or do you begin to quietly resent the organization, storing grievances you tell yourself don't matter but that slowly reshape how you see your own loyalty? Here's what makes this unbearable. The agency isn't testing whether you notice these contradictions. They're testing how you respond to them emotionally. Because loyalty isn't intellectual. It's not a rational commitment you maintain through logical consistency. Loyalty is emotional. Endurance. It's the ability to continue serving an organization that withholds validation, that offers no explanations, that treats you as simultaneously essential and disposable. Most people can fake loyalty when they're being watched. Far fewer can maintain it when they're being ignored. And that's the filter intelligence agencies use to separate officers who serve from personal conviction and officers who serve because they need external approval, career advancement, or the psychological comfort of belonging to something powerful. One kind of officer remains loyal. When abandoned, the other kind starts looking for exits, or worse, for alternatives. This is when agencies deploy their most sophisticated tool, time. Not urgency, not crisis, just time. Long, empty stretches where nothing happens, where you're left in a holding pattern with no clear trajectory, no feedback, no indication of whether you're valued or being phased out. Months pass. Assignments come and go, none of them particularly significant, none of them offering the kind of operational weight that would signal you're still considered important. You see colleagues advance. You see others quietly disappear from the organizational chart, and you remain in place, functioning, competent, but increasingly uncertain about what your role actually means. This isn't neglect. This is observation at its most refined. The agency is watching what you do when you think your career has stalled. Do you stay disciplined? Do you become bitter? Do you start making lateral moves, reaching out to contacts in other departments, other agencies, other governments? Do you begin to feel expendable? And if so, does that feeling make you more loyal or less? Some officers interpret the silence as punishment. Others interpret it as a test of patience. Both interpretations are dangerous, because both reveal the officer's need for the organization to communicate intent. But intelligence agencies don't always communicate intent. Sometimes they withhold it deliberately, creating a void that officers fill with their own assumptions, fears, and rationalizations. And those assumptions, those private narratives an officer constructs to make sense of organizational silence, are more revealing than any interrogation could ever produce. If you assume you're being sidelined because someone doubts you, that assumption exposes insecurity. If you assume you're being positioned for something larger, that assumption exposes ambition. If you assume nothing and simply continue your work without seeking validation, that reveals something else entirely, something rare, something the agency will either reward or fear, depending on what else they know about you. But there's a moment, And it comes differently for everyone. When the nature of the evaluation changes, when you realize, often long after it's already happened, that the agency is no longer observing whether you're loyal. They're measuring how loyal. They're calculating the threshold. How much can they ask of you before you refuse? How far can they push you into moral compromise before you break? How much will you sacrifice your ethics, your relationships, your sense of self before loyalty stops being a choice and becomes a cage? And once they know the threshold, once they've mapped the exact contours of your devotion and your limits, they own something more valuable than your obedience. They own your capacity for self-betrayal, and they'll use it. You won't know when it happened. You won't remember the moment the assessment shifted, but somewhere in the accumulation of silences, contradictions, and withheld validation, you crossed a line, not into disloyalty, into something more complex and far more dangerous. You became predictable. And in the world of intelligence, predictability isn't just a vulnerability, it's a weapon pointed at yourself. They catalog your reactions to contradictory orders, stalled careers, and relationships that dissolve without explanation. But all of that, every test up to this point, is preparation for the only evaluation that truly matters. The evaluation that determines not whether you're loyal, but whether your loyalty has a limit the agency can afford. And this test doesn't measure what you do. It measures what you don't do when given every reason to act. This is what most people never understand about intelligence work. The defining moment of your career isn't a successful operation or a crucial piece of intelligence you deliver. It's the moment you could have betrayed the organization and chose not to. Not because you were being watched, not because you feared consequences, but because something in you, something the agency spent years shaping without your awareness, made betrayal unthinkable even when it would have been easy, profitable, or morally defensible. That's the moment ISI and RAW have been engineering from the beginning. Not your recruitment, not your training, not your first classified briefing. The moment when betrayal is possible, even logical, and you reject it anyway. Some officers experience this moment as a tangible choice. They're approached by a foreign intelligence service. They're offered money, protection, leverage against the organization that's mistreated them, or they're placed in a position where they could leak information, sabotage an operation, or quietly assist an outcome that contradicts their orders. And in that moment, they have a decision to make. But here's what they don't realize. The decision has already been made, not by them, but by the version of themselves the agency spent years constructing. Every silence they endured, every contradiction they accepted, every moment they chose discipline over resentment, reshaped their internal architecture until loyalty stopped being a choice and became a reflex. By the time the moment arrives, the person capable of betrayal no longer exists. The agency didn't just test their loyalty, they built it. And once built, it's almost impossible to dismantle, even when you desperately want to. But most officers never face a dramatic moment of temptation. For them, the final test is quieter and far more insidious. It's the realization, years into their career, that nothing extraordinary has happened. No one approached them. No crisis forced a moral choice. No dramatic confrontation revealed whether they could be trusted. They simply continued working year after year in a state of sustained uncertainty, never knowing if they were valued or expendable, never receiving confirmation that their loyalty mattered. And then one day, without ceremony or acknowledgement, something shifts. They're given a new assignment, a different kind of access, or they're quietly moved into a role that signals, in the silent language of intelligence bureaucracy, that they've been cleared, not promoted, cleared as if some invisible concluded in their favor. without them ever knowing it was underway. This is the cruelest revelation, that the final loyalty test is passing through time without breaking. It's not about what you do when tested. It's about who you remain when nothing happens, when your career stagnates and you don't seek revenge, when you're excluded from important decisions and you don't leak information out of spite, when you watch others advance while you remain static, and you continue your work with the same discipline you had when you believed you mattered. The agency isn't looking for heroes. They're looking for people who can endure irrelevance without becoming dangerous. Because the officers who need validation, who require recognition, who can't tolerate being forgotten, are the officers who eventually compromise themselves. Not out of ideology, not out of greed, but out of the simple human need to matter to someone. And if the agency won't provide that, someone else will. ISI and RAW understand this with a clarity that borders on cruelty. They know that most betrayals don't begin with enemy contact or ideological disillusionment. They begin with an officer sitting alone, realizing that years of service have earned them nothing but more silence, more ambiguity, more waiting, and in that loneliness, that void where recognition should be. Foreign intelligence services find their opening, not through recruitment, through recognition, by offering the one thing the officer's own agency deliberately withholds: the confirmation that their work matters, that they're seen, that someone, somewhere, values what they know. This is why agencies withhold validation even from loyal officers. They're testing whether you need it, and if you do, if you break under sustained neglect and seek acknowledgement from unauthorized sources, you failed the final test even if you never technically betray anything. The officers who pass are the ones who stop waiting, who internalize the silence until it becomes their natural state, who continue their work not because they believe it will be rewarded, but because they've become incapable of doing anything else. This is what intelligence agencies create when they function perfectly. Not soldiers, not ideologues, not patriots. They create people whose identity has become so intertwined with the organization that separation is no longer psychologically possible. These officers don't stay loyal because they believe in the mission. They stay loyal because leaving would require them to answer a question they've spent their entire career avoiding. Who are they without this? And here is the truth that changes everything. The final loyalty test isn't designed to identify who can be trusted. It's designed to identify who has already been consumed, who has given so much of themselves to the organization that they no longer exist independently of it. These are the officers who advance, not because they're the most skilled or the most ideologically committed, but because they're the most thoroughly absorbed. They've passed the final test not by proving their loyalty, but by losing the capacity to imagine any alternative. The disturbing implication, the one intelligence agencies will never acknowledge, is that the most loyal officers aren't the most trustworthy. They're the most damaged. They're the ones who endured the uncertainty until it broke something foundational inside them, something that once allowed them to question, to doubt, to preserve a self separate from their role. And once that breaks, once an officer becomes indistinguishable from their function, they're not loyal to the country or the mission or even the organization. They're loyal to the only identity they have left. You might be wondering, as you should be, whether this applies only to intelligence officers, whether these mechanisms exist exclusively in ISI, RAW, or other agencies operating in the shadows. But if you've spent any time near power, near institutions that demand more than they explain, near systems that test you without telling you the rules, you already know the answer. The loyalty test is everywhere, and most people fail it without ever knowing it began.